Please be seated. My name's Mary Groeninger, and I'm so happy to be visiting you today at St. Mark's. Most Sundays, you'll find me presiding over a much more informal but equally joyful gathering of people of all ages up in Ely on the edge of the Boundary Waters. During the week, though, I have a different vocation. I teach freshman writing at Vermilion, Ely's open enrollment, residential, two-year college. My story today starts there, in a classroom full of beat-up desks and students who, let's be real here about freshman writing, would never have taken my class if it wasn't required. The class was English 92, a class we offer for students who need prep and practice before they tackle the freshman composition class required for graduation. These are the students I ask to teach every year, with their fears that they are terrible writers, with their histories from high school of being labeled as terrible students, with their prickly outsides and their incredibly soft hearts. They are the students who each year challenge me the most and who I end up loving the best. Like many of his classmates, Jay came to Vermilion from a big urban school that valued his athletic talent more than his academic future, where he and others were passed on from one grade to the next without needing to do much actual work as long as they didn't make trouble. Also, like many of his classmates, Jay struggled to put coherent paragraphs and sometimes even sentences together, but he had stories to tell. I remember one about working at McDonald's. It wasn't the description of the job that caught me so much as his side comment toward the end that he mostly worked there because the manager would give him free food to take home to his siblings on nights his mother was working, trying to make ends meet for their family. That one sentence expressed a mixture of kindness and injustice that left me breathless. Most of the students in the class came in with some type of learning disability. ADHD was the biggest issue for Jay and for others, so I do my best to break the period up into short activities, a brief lesson at the beginning of class, followed by some kind of, because many of them were athletes, always competitive team exercise to keep them engaged and to bring the lesson home. And once a week, they'd spend the period revising an essay I'd commented on the night before. They'd work on their laptops, and I'd walk around the room helping them find an idea, reorganize, rephrase, or just spell something correctly. Nothing bothered them more than that they couldn't spell words correctly. Everybody needed help with something, and even small problems could completely derail them. So even with the help from a tutor, I'd spend the whole class hopping from one table to the next to the next. So one day, I was sitting across the aisle from Jay, helping another student. I glanced his way and noticed that Jay had once again opened a second tab on his computer and started watching basketball videos on YouTube when he was supposed to be revising his paper. Something that drove me crazy and that I'd specifically banned during writing time. A ban he forgot or ignored nearly every day that we worked on those assignments. Most of the time, I'd go over and ask him if he was having trouble writing and gently nudge him back on track. That day, though, my tongue was filled with full-on Jamesian fire. "Jay," I said, "if you're not going to work, just leave. You're being disrespectful to me and to everyone else trying to work here." Jay looked at me straight in the eye and said, "Hell no, you can't make me leave here." My friends, I'd made a mistake. And there I was, stuck. Just, I'm guessing, like the teachers James is talking to in his letter today. From the same mouth, James says, comes blessing and cursing. I chose cursing, and my curse rebounded on me. Because here's the thing. I have a son, grown up now, who was, as a child, was unusually rational, understanding, and compliant with just about anything I asked him to do until I said the words, "Do it because I said so." And I get that. My own insides, from the time I was small to this day, have always curdled in unreasonable anger when someone tells me to do something rather than asking me or offering a suggestion, even when they're right. On top of that, a student who grew up like Jay in the same kind of school and neighborhood once had the grace to explain it to me this way. "Ms. G, look, when you're from the hood and people start talking respect and disrespect, you gotta be ready to fight. That's just how it is." So yeah, I knew better, but James isn't lying when he says the tongue can be a restless evil, full of poison. So there I was, caught in my own trap. If I backed down, I'd lose face in front of all the other students in the class. YouTube sports would be breaking out everywhere every week. But not backing down meant I'd lose the fragile connection I'd built with a student who every day sparked both fire and light. All of you, I'm betting, have faced this kind of showdown with a stubborn child, a hostile coworker, an angry parent or teacher, that friend or crazy uncle whose political views are opposite your own. And all of today's readings also explore this quandary. The psalm names it as those times when we let our presumptuous sin get dominion over us. Or, a little easier, as Eugene Peterson translates it in The Message, the times we think we can take over God's work, when instead we should, like wisdom, reflect eternal light. Even Jesus and Peter find themselves stuck there in today's gospel. I imagine them just glaring at each other in front of all the disciples in a standoff neither wanted. Because Jesus, right, is teaching something really hard, something that is opposite from what Peter or any of the disciples wanted to hear. It's not what they signed up for or what they expected. They want a Messiah who is going to fight the power, not suffer and die. They remind me of my students in English 92 who often come to Vermilion to play ball so they can move on to a D1 or a D2 school, and they dream the pros. It can be both shocking and frustrating for my students to find that their teachers' goals don't align with their own. that we mostly just want them to do well academically, believing in a different kind of successful future for them. Given all that, it's not surprising really that Jay reacted to me so angrily. It's also not surprising that faced with his teacher predicting his own death at the hands of those he's supposed to be supplanting, that Peter rebukes the one he has just named Messiah. Or that Jesus, facing the tremendous difficulty of the past he must take, without support of those he is closest to, snaps, "Get behind me, Satan," back at Peter. Both of their tongues cursing someone who James reminds us is made in the likeness of God. Still, I'm going to side with Jesus here and label these times as Satan moments, times when our untamed tongues are a relentless evil, speaking when our ears should listen, times when we curse where we should bless. God's wisdom is different from what we often do. In Solomon's words, she orders all things well. The statutes of the Lord, the psalm sings today, are just and rejoice the heart. The rules, our knowledge of what's right, are not meant to be used to force our will on one another. But I'm also with Peter, honestly, hoping for a Messiah who will fix the messes we get ourselves in, like I did that day. If God's good order was working as it should be, if people communicated as continually and peacefully as the heavens in the psalm, one day telling its tale to another, and one night imparting knowledge to one another, if everyone followed God's just and perfect law, Romans wouldn't be conquering other nations. Fishermen like Peter wouldn't be exploited and oppressed. Jesus wouldn't have to cure the blind and the dumb in order to restore them to their communities. We wouldn't live in a country that chooses derision over careful listening and self-righteousness over compassion for our neighbor's pain. Jesus lives each day with his energy concentrated on God's wisdom, a wisdom which is not concerned with being right or with securing power. Every day, Jesus chooses to speak the truth, to connect, to heal, to forgive, and to love. The fact that that guy is headed for suffering and death in today's gospel is a sign that things are mightily messed up in the world. That God's people are at the kind of stubborn, angry, irrational snapping point Jay and I were at that day. Suffering like this happens when people fall out of sync with one another. As James points out, we have to make a choice. Water can't be brackish or fresh. We can't be both condemning and loving. So you remember that dilemma I faced that day in my classroom? Well, to be honest, I can't remember what choice I made that day. But I do know that every time I let go of my ego in those kinds of moments, meeting anger with peace, choosing to bridle my tongue, things go better. Sometimes a student comes back to me in private and offers an apology. And even when that doesn't happen, letting go of my anger gives them the space to do the same. A few weeks after our standoff in the classroom, Jay and I were working together on his writing, this time one-on-one in the college's academic resource center. We sat together in front of a computer, reading through the essay he'd finally written, sentence by sentence, when suddenly I paused and read one of those sentences out loud. And then I read it again, slowly. "Jay," I said, "do you hear that? That is a beautiful sentence." We both paused for a moment, silent, considering. He looked at me a little sideways, and a smile just flitted across his face. Jay and I connected in that moment because we were sitting side by side, because I was paying attention to his words, noticing more than I was teaching. And as I read and listened, I could hear the beauty in his language amid all the rough spots. And when I read that one sentence out loud, he could hear it too. The promise in that one beautiful sentence, as shrouded as the life of a small-town rabbi in captive Israel, as vast and clear as a universe where wisdom is like the light, succeeded by the night, but against which no evil can prevail.